The tears streaming down Willow Montgomery's face glittered like diamonds in the harsh afternoon sun as she stumbled toward Cottonwood Springs station. Her once fine blue dress was torn and dusty, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as the stagecoach that had abandoned her disappeared into the distance. Behind her lay a trail of heartbreak. Ahead, nothing but uncertainty in a land as unforgiving as it was vast. The rhythmic sound of hoofbeats approached from behind, but Willow was too consumed by despair to register the danger a lone rider might pose to a woman alone in the Arizona Territory of 1879. It wasn't until the rider slowed his Palomino stallion to match her pace that she looked up, hastily wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You're not alone," the cowboy said, his voice as warm as the desert breeze but firm like the mountains that lined the horizon. Willow stopped, torn between fear and the desperate need for human kindness. The stranger's face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see his eyes kind yet weathered by years under the western sun. "I don't need your charity, sir," she managed, though her trembling voice betrayed her. The cowboy dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground. "Yates Blackwood," he introduced himself, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair. "And it isn't charity to help someone in need. These parts aren't meant for walking alone." Willow hesitated, studying the man before her. His clothes were worn but clean, his revolver holstered at his side, suggesting he knew how to protect himself, and perhaps her too. Though every lesson in propriety warned against trusting strangers, especially in this lawless territory, something in his steady gaze told her he meant no harm. "Willow Montgomery," she finally replied, her voice steadier now. "I was bound for Cottonwood Springs to meet my fiancé, but it seems he's had a change of heart." She gestured to the letter clutched in her hand, now crumpled and tear-stained. "The stagecoach driver wouldn't wait once I became distressed." Yates's jaw tightened. "That ain't right, leaving a lady stranded. Cottonwood Springs is still 5 miles out." He glanced at the sky, where the sun was already beginning its descent. "We'd best get moving if we want to make it before dark." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Willow took it, allowing him to help her onto his horse. She settled behind him, awkwardly placing her hands on his shoulders. "You might want to hold tighter than that, Miss Montgomery," Yates advised as he urged his horse forward. "Ranger here has a spirited gait." Reluctantly, Willow wrapped her arms around his waist, acutely aware of the impropriety but more concerned with staying mounted. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves beneath them gradually calmed her frayed nerves, and she found herself relaxing against the solid warmth of the cowboy's back. "What takes you to Cottonwood Springs, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Just passing through," he replied after a moment. "Got business with the station master, and it's just Yates, if you don't mind. Then I insist you call me Willow." She paused, then added softly, "Thank you for your kindness. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Yates nodded, his profile strong against the orange glow of the setting sun. "Everyone needs a helping hand sometimes, even in places as hard as this." As they rode, Willow couldn't help but wonder about the man whose steady presence was already becoming a comfort. He wasn't the type of gentleman she'd been raised to consider suitable company, not with his rough-hewn ways and frontier manner, yet there was something undeniably reassuring about him. The truth was, Willow had never intended to come west at all. It had been a desperate gamble after her family's financial ruin following her father's death. Her engagement to Harold Whitley, a bank manager she'd never met in person, had been arranged through correspondence. He'd promised security and a respectable life in the growing town of Cottonwood Springs. Now, that promise had been shattered by the letter that had arrived at the last stagecoach, a letter explaining that Harold had reunited with a former sweetheart and would not be meeting Willow after all. "Mind if I ask what happened?" Yates questioned gently As if sensing the direction of her thoughts, Willow sighed. My former fiancé, has found someone else, someone he deems more suitable for life in the West. She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. I'm not sure what I'll do now. I spent nearly everything I had on the journey here. Yates was quiet for a long moment. The West has a way of testing folks, seeing what they're made of. Some break, some bend, the strongest find new paths. I'm afraid I don't feel particularly strong at the moment, Willow admitted. Yet here you are, still moving forward. Something in his simple observation touched her, and Willow found herself blinking back fresh tears, not of despair this time, but of a strange, unexpected gratitude for this chance encounter with a kind stranger. As the first buildings of Cottonwood Springs came into view, silhouetted against the darkening sky, Willow realized that for the first time since receiving Harold's letter, she was breathing easier. Whatever challenges awaited her in this dusty frontier town, at least she wouldn't be facing them alone tonight. Cottonwood Springs emerged from the landscape like an island in a sea of desert brush. A collection of wooden buildings lined the main street, their windows glowing with lamplight as the day faded to dusk. The stagecoach station stood at the town's edge, a weathered two-story structure with a wide porch and hitching posts out front. Here we are, Yates said, bringing his horse to a stop in front of the station. Let's see about getting you settled for the night. The station master was a gruff man with a gray-streaked beard who barely looked up from his ledger when they entered. Stage already came through, he muttered. Next one ain't for 3 days. Mr. Jackson, Yates addressed him, his tone respectful but firm. Miss Montgomery here was left behind when the stage departed. She needs accommodations. The station master finally looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in Willow's disheveled appearance. Hotels across the way, got rooms for $2 a night. Willow's heart sank. After paying for her ticket and meals along the journey, she had less than $5 to her name. 3 nights at the hotel would leave her with nothing. Is there any work available in town? She asked, straightening her shoulders. I'm well educated and can keep accounts, or I could work as a seamstress, or ain't much call for fancy ladies' skills, Jackson interrupted with a dismissive wave. Town's got all the help it needs. Yates placed a steadying hand on Willow's shoulder. Miss Montgomery is a resourceful woman who's traveled a long way. Surely someone in town could use her talents. The station master shrugged. Try the Silverthorne Hotel. Widow Prescott, who runs it, might need help with the cleaning. Or the schoolhouse teacher's been talking about needing an assistant. He returned to his ledger, clearly considering the conversation over. Outside, the evening air had cooled considerably, and Willow shivered in her thin dress. The reality of her situation was beginning to settle in, stranded in a strange town with minimal funds and no connections. I can escort you to the hotel, Yates offered, leading his horse by the reins as they walked side by side down the dusty street. You've been too kind already, Willow said, though the thought of facing the town alone filled her with dread. It's no trouble. I need lodging for the night myself. The Silverthorne Hotel was a 2-story building with a freshly painted sign and clean windows, clearly the pride of Cottonwood Springs. A bell jingled as they entered the lobby, where a woman in her 40s looked up from behind the front desk. Evening, Mrs. Prescott, Yates greeted her, removing his hat. The lady here needs a room, and I'll take one as well. Mrs. Prescott adjusted her spectacles as she studied Willow. $2 a night, meals extra. We serve breakfast at 6 and supper at 5. Willow hesitated, calculating quickly. Would you perhaps have any work available? I'm finding myself in need of employment. Mrs. Prescott's expression softened slightly. As it happens, my girl left last week to get married. I could use help with the rooms and serving meals. Doesn't pay much, 50 cents a day plus room and board. Relief washed over Willow. I'd be most grateful for the opportunity, madam. You can start tomorrow, 6 sharp. Mrs. Prescott handed her a key. Room 4, top of the stairs, first door on the right. There's a washroom at the end of the hall. As they climbed the stairs, Willow turned to Yates. "I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Blackwood Yates. You've quite literally saved me today." He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, transforming his solemn face into something quite handsome. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad things are looking up for you." At her door, they paused. Willow suddenly realized she might never see him again after tonight, and the thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. "Will you be staying in town long?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Got some business to attend to," he replied vaguely. "Should take a few days. Then perhaps I'll see you at breakfast." Willow couldn't help the hopeful note in her voice. Yates nodded, his eyes warm in the dim hallway light. "I'd like that." As Willow prepared for bed in her small but clean room, washing the dust of travel from her face and hands in the basin provided, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, she had been traveling to meet her future husband. Tonight, she was alone in a frontier town, preparing to work as a hotel maid. Yet somehow, despite everything, a small flame of hope had kindled within her. Perhaps it was the unexpected kindness of a stranger, or the simple relief of having a roof over her head and the promise of work. Whatever it was, for the first time since receiving Harold's letter, Willow felt that perhaps all was not lost after all. She fell asleep to the unfamiliar sounds of the western night, distant piano music from the saloon down the street, the occasional shout or laugh, the creaking of the wooden building as it settled. And somewhere in the same building, a cowboy who had changed the course of her day with a simple act of compassion. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the thin curtains and the scent of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. Willow dressed quickly in her second-best dress. She owned only 3 now, having sold most of her wardrobe to finance her journey west. She pinned her hair in a simple but neat style and made her way downstairs to begin her new duties. Mrs. Prescott was already bustling about the small dining room, setting places for the hotel's guests. "There you are," she said briskly. "Kitchen's through there. Mr. Turner's finishing up the cooking. You'll serve and clear, then help with the rooms after." "Yes, madam," Willow replied, tying on the apron Mrs. Prescott handed her. The work was straightforward enough, though different from anything Willow had done before. Back in Philadelphia, her family had employed servants until their financial collapse. Now, she was the one carrying plates and refilling coffee cups for travelers and the few long-term residents of the hotel. Yates came down when the dining room was nearly full. Their eyes met across the room, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement as he took a seat at an empty table by the window. When she approached to take his order, he looked up with concern in his eyes. "How are you faring this morning?" "Better, thank you," Willow answered truthfully. "Work is a balm for troubled thoughts." "Wise words," he commented. "Just coffee and whatever's hot from the kitchen, please." As she served him his breakfast, Willow noticed how other diners seemed to regard Yates with a mixture of respect and caution. He ate quietly, occasionally gazing out the window at the town coming to life outside. The morning passed quickly in a flurry of activity as Willow learned the rhythms of her new position. By midday, she had served breakfast, helped clear and wash the dishes, and was now following Mrs. Prescott from room to room, learning how to properly make beds and dust to the widow's exacting standards. "You've got a good touch," Mrs. Prescott commented as Willow smoothed the counterpane on a freshly made bed. "Most girls from back east aren't so handy." "My mother believed in being practical," Willow explained. "She insisted I learn household management alongside my studies." "Smart woman, your mother." Mrs. Prescott paused, studying Willow more carefully. "What really brings you to Cottonwood Springs, if you don't mind my asking?" "Most young ladies don't travel west alone." Willow hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I was to be married. My fiancé was the manager of the bank here, Mr. Harold Whitley, but he found someone else." Recognition dawned on Mrs. Prescott's face. "Ah, young Whitley." "Yes, He caused quite a stir when he suddenly married the Carson girl last month. Nobody knew he had a fiancé coming from back east. She clucked her tongue disapprovingly. Men can be fickle creatures, especially out here where women are scarce. It was a shock, Willow admitted. I'd sold everything to come here. Well, his loss may be our gain, Mrs. Prescott said kindly. You seem a capable sort. Cottonwood Springs could use more women of quality. The widow's words were unexpectedly comforting. Perhaps there was a place for her here after all, even if it wasn't the one she'd imagined. In the afternoon, while Mrs. Prescott attended to the hotel's accounts, Willow was sent to purchase supplies from the general store. The main street was busy with wagons, riders, and townspeople going about their business. The Wild West she'd read about in dime novels seemed both more mundane and more vibrant in reality. The general store was well-stocked, testament to Cottonwood Springs' position as a stopping point on the stage line. As Willow examined Mrs. Prescott's list, a commotion outside drew her attention. A group of cowboys had ridden into town, their horses kicking up dust as they made their way toward the saloon. Reed Dalton and his boys, the storekeeper explained, noticing her interest. They work the Double D Ranch north of here, come to town every month or so to blow off steam. Through the window, Willow could see Yates standing outside the sheriff's office across the street, watching the cowboys with a guarded expression. There was something in his stance that suggested alertness, like a man anticipating trouble. Mr. Blackwood seems concerned, she observed. The storekeeper glanced up sharply. You know Blackwood. He helped me yesterday when I was stranded outside town. The man's expression grew thoughtful. That's so? Well, he's got reason to be wary of Dalton's crew. There's bad blood there. He seemed about to say more, then thought better of it. Will there be anything else today, miss? Willow completed her purchases, curiosity piqued by the storekeeper's reaction. As she left the store, packages in hand, she noticed Yates was no longer in sight and the cowboys had disappeared into the saloon. She was halfway back to the hotel when a figure stepped out of an alleyway, blocking her path. It was one of the cowboys she'd seen earlier, a young man with a cocky smile and liquor on his breath. Well, hello there, pretty lady, he slurred. You're new in town. How about I show you around? No, thank you, Willow replied firmly, trying to step around him. I need to return to the hotel. He moved to block her again. Don't be like that, just being friendly. The lady declined, came a familiar voice. Yates appeared beside them, his expression hard as he stared down the drunken cowboy. Move along, Parker. The young man's face darkened. Ain't none of your business, Blackwood. I'm making it my business. Yates's hand rested casually near his holstered revolver, not as a threat but a reminder. For a tense moment, Willow thought the cowboy might argue further, but he finally spat in the dirt and stalked away, muttering under his breath. Are you all right? Yates asked, turning to her with concern. Yes, thank you. Willow's heart was racing, though whether from the confrontation or Yates's timely appearance, she couldn't say. He just startled me. Dalton's men can be trouble, best to avoid them when they're drinking. He took some of the packages from her arms. Let me help you back to the hotel. As they walked side by side, Willow gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. The storekeeper suggested there's history between you and these men. Yates was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. We've had our differences, he finally said. It's complicated. I see. Though clearly she didn't, not fully. It's not something you need to worry about, he added, his tone gentler. Dalton and his men will be gone by tomorrow. At the hotel entrance, he handed back her packages. Be careful out there, Willow. Not everyone in Cottonwood Springs is welcoming to newcomers. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers about the mysterious cowboy who kept coming to her rescue. That evening, after helping serve supper to the hotel guests, Yates was notably absent. Willow finally had a moment to herself. She sat on the edge of her bed, bone-weary from the unaccustomed labor but oddly satisfied. There was dignity in work, her father had always said, and she found truth in those words now. A soft knock at her door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found Mrs. Prescott holding a sealed envelope. "This came for you," the widow said, handing it over. "Brought by a boy from the telegraph office." Puzzled, Willow thanked her and closed the door. Who would be sending her messages? The only person who knew her whereabouts was her aunt in Philadelphia, and even she wouldn't have had time to respond to Willow's last letter. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the paper to find a brief note written in a firm, masculine hand. "Miss Montgomery, I must leave town unexpectedly on business. Please accept my apologies for not saying goodbye properly. Should you need assistance during your stay in Cottonwood Springs, Sheriff Hollies is a good man. I hope to return within the week. Respectfully, Y. Blackwood." Willow read the note twice, surprised by the sharp pang of disappointment it evoked. It was foolish to feel abandoned by a man she barely knew, yet something about Yates Blackwood had made her feel safe in this unfamiliar place. Now he was gone, and she truly was alone. Setting the note aside, she prepared for bed, determined to focus on the positive. She had work, shelter, and the beginnings of independence. Those were no small things for a woman alone in the West. Whatever connection she'd felt to the kind-eyed Cowboy was surely just gratitude and the vulnerability of her situation. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts returned to Yates, the steadiness of his presence, the unexpected gentleness in his rough hands, the way his rare smile transformed his face. She wondered where his mysterious business had taken him and whether he truly would return as promised. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of work and gradual adjustment to her new life. Willow proved adept at her duties, and Mrs. Prescott seemed pleased with her performance, even allowing her to help with the accounting books when she discovered Willow's facility with numbers. "You've got a good head for figures," the widow commented on the third day as Willow reconciled the monthly accounts. "Better than mine, truth be told. My father was a businessman," Willow explained. "He insisted I learn basic accounting principles. He said a woman should always understand her financial position." Wise man. Mrs. Prescott hesitated, then added, "You know, if you're planning to stay in Cottonwood Springs, you might want to speak with Mr. Bennett at the bank. With your skills, you could do better than hotel work." The suggestion was kindly meant, but Willow felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of approaching the bank where Harold Whitley worked. "Perhaps in time," she said noncommittally. "For now, I'm grateful for this position." On her fourth day in town, during her afternoon break, Willow finally gathered the courage to explore more of Cottonwood Springs. The town was larger than she'd initially thought, with several side streets branching off the main thoroughfare. There was a small church, a schoolhouse, the bank, and various shops and businesses catering to both the town's residents and travelers passing through. Her wanderings took her past the sheriff's office, where a weathered sign identified the lawman as Sheriff Thomas Hollies. Remembering Yates's note, she hesitated, wondering if she should introduce herself. Before she could decide, the door opened and a man with iron gray hair and a star pinned to his vest emerged. "Afternoon, miss," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Can I help you with something?" "I'm Willow Montgomery," she introduced herself. "I'm new in town, working at the Silverthorne Hotel." Recognition flickered in the sheriff's eyes. "Miss Montgomery, yes, I've heard about you. Yates mentioned you might stop by." The casual reference to Yates caught her off guard. "You've spoken with Mr. Blackwood recently?" "Got word from him yesterday," Sheriff Hollies confirmed. "He asked me to keep an eye out for you, make sure you're settling in all right." Willow wasn't sure whether to feel touched or embarrassed by this revelation. "That's very kind, but I assure you I'm managing quite well." The sheriff studied her with kind but shrewd eyes. "I don't doubt it. Yates doesn't concern himself with people who can't stand on their own 2 feet, said you had plenty of backbone." "He hardly knows me," Willow protested, though she felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "He's a good judge of character, has to be in his line of work." Sheriff Hollies seemed to catch himself. "But I shouldn't keep you. If you need anything while you're getting settled, my door's always open." "Thank you, Sheriff." Willow hesitated, then added, "May I ask when Mr. Blackwood is expected to return?" "Hard to say with certainty. His business can be unpredictable." The sheriff's expression revealed nothing more. "But he usually keeps his word when he says he'll be back." As Willow continued her walk, she pondered this new information. What exactly was Yates Blackwood's business that took him away so suddenly and prompted him to ask the sheriff to watch over her? He had the manner of a cowboy, but something about him suggested he was more than that. Her musings were interrupted when she realized she had wandered to the edge of town, near the stagecoach station where she'd arrived just days ago. The memory of her tearful walk toward this very building, devastated by Harold's rejection, seemed both recent and distant. "Miss Montgomery." She turned at the sound of her name to find a well-dressed man approaching handsome in a conventional way, with carefully combed hair and a neat mustache. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar. "Yes," she responded cautiously. "Harold Whitley," he introduced himself with an awkward bow. I believe we had some correspondence." Willow felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. This was the man who had promised marriage and security, only to withdraw both with a hastily written letter. Standing before him now, she felt a strange mixture of anger, hurt, and most surprisingly indifference. "Mr. Whitley," she acknowledged coldly, "I hadn't expected to encounter you." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I heard from Mrs. Prescott that you were in town. I wanted to express my sincere apologies for the way things turned out." "You might have expressed those apologies before I traveled 2,000 miles, Willow pointed out, finding strength in her anger. "Or perhaps before I sold my family home and most of my possessions to finance the journey." Harold winced. "I know there's no excuse. Margaret, that is, my wife, and I had a complicated history when she returned to town unexpectedly. Well, old feelings resurfaced. And your commitment to me simply vanished." Willow was surprised by her own composure. A week ago, she might have broken down in tears or pleaded with him to reconsider. Now, facing the man who had so callously altered the course of her life, she felt only a detached sort of pity. "I am truly sorry for the pain I've caused," Harold said, looking genuinely contrite. "If there's anything I can do to make amends, perhaps a loan to help you return east." The offer, though likely well-intentioned, stung Willow's pride. "Thank you, but no. I found employment here and intend to make my own way." He seemed taken aback by her response. "That's admirable, but surely a lady of your background doesn't intend to remain a hotel maid indefinitely." "My plans are my own concern, Mr. Whitley," Willow replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must return to my duties." As she walked away, head held high despite the trembling in her hands, Willow realized something important. She didn't want to go back east. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, despite the hardships and uncertainties, there was something about this place, this life, that called to her spirit in a way Philadelphia never had. Here, she wasn't Judge Montgomery's daughter or a suitable match for a rising businessman. She was simply Willow, a woman making her own choices and standing on her own abilities. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, she wrote a letter to her aunt, explaining her decision to remain in Cottonwood Springs for the time being. As she sealed the envelope, Willow wondered what Yates would think of her encounter with Harold and why his opinion should matter to her at all. A week passed, then another. Willow's position at the hotel evolved as Mrs. Prescott recognized her capabilities. While she still helped with the rooms and meals, she now also managed the accounts and helped with correspondence, tasks the widow had always found tiresome. She made a few acquaintances in town: the school teacher, Miss Abernathy, the Reverend's wife, Mrs. Tanner, and young Mary, who worked at the millinery shop. They were kind, if a bit curious, about the Eastern lady who now served breakfast at the Silverthorne Hotel. Of Yates Blackwood, there was no sign. Occasionally, Willow would catch herself watching the street from the hotel windows, hoping to glimpse a familiar figure on a Palomino horse. Each day that passed without his return dimmed her hopes a little more. "You expecting someone, Mrs.?" Prescott asked one afternoon, catching Willow gazing out the front window during a lull in her duties. "No," Willow answered quickly, too quickly. "Just enjoying the view." The widow gave her a knowing look. "If you're wondering about Blackwood, he's been gone longer than this before. Man's got responsibilities that take him far and wide." "I hardly know Mr. Blackwood," Willow protested. "He was simply kind to me when I arrived. Hum." Mrs. Prescott didn't look convinced. "Well, when he does come back, and he always does, you might want to ask him about those responsibilities. Might save you some wondering." Before Willow could formulate a response, the bell above the door jingled, announcing new arrivals. A family of 4 entered, looking trail weary and hopeful for accommodations. Grateful for the interruption, Willow hurried to assist them, pushing thoughts of the enigmatic cowboy from her mind. That evening, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing welcome rain but also fierce winds that rattled the hotel's windows. Willow was helping in the kitchen when Mrs. Prescott called her to the front desk. "Rider coming in fast," the widow explained, peering through the rain-streaked window. "Looks like trouble." The door burst open moments later, bringing with it a gust of wind and rain and a tall figure wrapped in a dripping slicker. He pulled back his hat to reveal a face Willow had begun to think she might never see again. "Yates!" she exclaimed, forgetting propriety in her surprise. He looked tired, his face leaner than she remembered and sporting several days' worth of stubble. But his eyes lit up at the sight of her, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You're still here. Where else would I be?" The words came out softer than she intended. Mrs. Prescott cleared her throat pointedly. "Mr. Blackwood, you look half drowned. There's hot stew in the kitchen if you're hungry, and your usual room is available." "Much obliged, Mrs. Prescott." He turned back to Willow. "If you have a moment later, I'd like to hear how you've been faring." "Of course," she replied, conscious of Mrs. Prescott's interested gaze. "I finish my duties at 8. After Yates had gone upstairs to change out of his wet clothes, the widow gave Willow an appraising look. "Your cowboy's back." "He's not my cowboy," Willow protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Maybe not yet, Mrs. Prescott replied with a small smile. "But I've known Yates Blackwood for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he just looked at you." Willow busied herself with straightening papers on the desk, unwilling to examine the flutter of happiness those words provoked. "He was merely being polite. If you say so, dear." The widow patted her shoulder. "Why don't you take some coffee and pie to the parlor at 8? It's more private than the dining room." At precisely 8 o'clock, Willow found herself in the small parlor off the main lobby. A tray with coffee and 2 slices of apple pie set on the table before her. She had changed from her work dress to her one remaining good dress, a dark blue that complemented her eyes, and pinned her hair more carefully than usual. It was foolish to be nervous, she told herself. This was simply a friendly conversation with the man who had helped her when she was in distress. Nothing more. Yates arrived a few minutes later, clean-shaven and dressed in a fresh shirt, though he still carried himself with the weariness of a man who had ridden long and hard. "You look well," he said by way of greeting, taking the seat across from her. "Cottonwood Springs agrees with you." "Thank you," Willow replied, pouring coffee for them both. "It's been an adjustment, but not an unpleasant one. Mrs. Prescott treating you fairly, more than fairly. She's given me additional responsibilities beyond what I was hired for. It seems my education has some practical value after all." Yates smiled at that. "I never doubted it." He took a sip of coffee, sighing appreciatively at the warmth. "I spoke with Sheriff Hollies before the storm hit. He mentioned you introduced yourself." "I did," Willow confirmed. "He also mentioned you had asked him to keep an eye on me." Yates had the grace to look slightly abashed. I hope that didn't offend you. It's not that I thought you couldn't manage on your own. Why did you then? She asked directly. He considered her question seriously. Cottonwood Springs is generally peaceful, but it has its share of troubles. Reed Dalton and his men being one of them. I didn't like leaving you alone so soon after your arrival. That's very thoughtful, but I assure you I've managed to avoid any further encounters with Mr. Dalton or his cowboys. I'm glad to hear it. Yates took a bite of pie before continuing. I also heard you had a different encounter with Harold Whitley. Willow tensed. News travels quickly in small towns, it seems. It does, he agreed. I hope it wasn't too difficult for you. Actually, it was surprisingly liberating, Willow admitted. Seeing him in person made me realize that what I thought I wanted, the security of marriage to a respectable man, wasn't what I truly needed. And what do you truly need, Willow Montgomery? Yates asked softly. The question caught her off guard with its directness. She looked into his eyes, seeing genuine interest there, and found herself answering with equal honesty. The freedom to discover who I am, away from the expectations of society and family. The chance to rely on my own abilities and judgment. She paused, then added, and perhaps someday to find someone who values me for those things rather than for the suitable wife I might make. Yates held her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Those seem like worthy aims. And what of you? Willow asked, suddenly bold. Mrs. Prescott hinted that your business involves more than ordinary ranch work. Sheriff Hollis suggested the same. For a moment, she thought he might evade the question as he had before. Instead, he set down his fork and leaned slightly forward. I work for the government, he said quietly. United States Marshal Service. Have done for 7 years now. Willow's eyes widened. You're a lawman? Yes, though I don't advertise it widely. Makes my work easier if certain people don't know who I am right away. Is that why you were watching Reed Dalton and his men so carefully? Yates nodded. The Double D Ranch has been suspected of running stolen cattle. I've been building a case against Dalton for months. Is that where you were these past 2 weeks, investigating Mr. Dalton? Partly, he acknowledged. I also had to escort a prisoner to Fort Riley for trial. The stage isn't secure enough for certain criminals. Willow tried to reconcile this new information with the man she'd first met on the road, a seemingly ordinary cowboy who had offered kindness to a stranger in distress. Now she understood the watchfulness in his eyes, the quiet authority in his bearing. It must be a dangerous life, she observed. It can be, he admitted, but it's one with purpose. I believe in what I do, bringing order to places that need it. Is that why you helped me that day? Because it's your duty to assist those in need. Yates set down his coffee cup, his expression softening. No, Willow, I helped you because no decent man could ride past a woman in distress. The badge had nothing to do with it. Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. I'm glad you didn't ride past, she said softly. So am I. His hand moved across the table, coming to rest near hers, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I've thought about you often these past weeks. Willow's breath caught. She knew she should withdraw her hand, maintain the proper distance between them. Instead, she found herself sliding her fingers forward until they brushed against his. I've thought of you as well, she admitted. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither had voiced. Then the parlor door opened, breaking the spell as Mrs. Prescott entered to collect the tray. Don't mind me, the widow said with a knowing smile. Just tidying up before turning in. Yates withdrew his hand, and Willow felt the loss of his touch keenly. It's getting late, he said, rising from his chair. And you have an early start tomorrow, I imagine. Yes, Willow agreed, standing as well. Will you be staying in town for a while? For a few days at least, he confirmed. I need to make my report to the territorial office and gather more information on Dalton. They walked together to the foot of the stairs, where they would part ways to their respective rooms. In the dim lamplight of the empty lobby, Yates turned to her. Would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow evening? Not here at the hotel, but at Gregory's restaurant down the street. They serve a decent steak. I would like that very much, Willow replied, warmth spreading through her at the invitation. Good night then, Willow. He hesitated, then reached for her hand, bringing it briefly to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to the drawing rooms of Philadelphia than the frontier town of Cottonwood Springs. Sleep well. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Willow knew that sleep would be a long time coming. Her mind was too full of this new understanding of Yates Blackwood, not just a cowboy but a U.S. Marshal, a man with authority and purpose. And perhaps, if she dared to hope, a man who saw in her something worth returning for. The next day dragged interminably as Willow awaited the evening. She performed her duties with her usual efficiency, but her mind frequently drifted to thoughts of dinner with Yates. It would be her first proper social engagement since arriving in Cottonwood Springs indeed, her first time dining out with a gentleman unchaperoned, something that would have been scandalous in Philadelphia society. You're 1,000 miles away today, Mrs. Prescott observed as they worked together on the hotel's linen inventory. Would it have anything to do with your dinner plans tonight? Willow looked up, startled. How did you know about that? Yates mentioned it when he came down for breakfast, the widow explained with a smile. Asked if I could spare you this evening. I hope that's not inconvenient, Willow said, suddenly concerned about neglecting her duties. Not at all. You've earned an evening off. Mrs. Prescott's expression grew more serious. Yates is a good man, Willow, one of the best I know. But his life isn't an easy one for a woman to share. We're just having dinner, Willow protested, though she knew in her heart it was more than that. Of course. The widow patted her hand. Just be sure of what you want before you give your heart away. Out here, choices have a way of becoming permanent very quickly. The warning, kindly meant, lingered in Willow's mind as she prepared for the evening. She wore her blue dress again, her only real option for a dinner engagement, but took extra care with her appearance, arranging her dark hair in a style that softened her features, and adding the pearl earrings that had been her mother's, the one piece of jewelry she hadn't sold. Yates was waiting in the lobby when she descended the stairs at 6. He too had made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean dark jacket over his usual shirt and a string tie at his collar. The effect was striking, still unmistakably a man of the frontier, but with a polish that spoke of respect for the occasion and for her. You look beautiful, he said simply as she reached him. Thank you. Willow smiled, noting the appreciative warmth in his gaze. You look quite handsome yourself. Gregory's restaurant proved to be a small but respectable establishment with tablecloths and proper silverware, clearly the finest dining Cottonwood Springs had to offer. The proprietor greeted Yates by name and led them to a corner table, somewhat removed from the other diners. I recommend the steak, Yates advised as they studied the limited menu. Gregory gets his beef from the Carter Ranch, honest cattle, unlike some in these parts. Their conversation over dinner flowed easily, moving from Willow's adjustment to Western life to Yates's experiences as a marshal. He told her how he'd come to the job after working as a ranch hand and serving briefly as a deputy in a small Kansas town. I never planned on wearing a badge, he admitted, but I found I had a knack for tracking and a strong sense of right and wrong. The marshal who recruited me said those were qualities he couldn't teach. Your family must be proud, Willow observed. A shadow crossed his face. My parents passed on years ago. Fever took them both in 67. No siblings. There's an uncle in Colorado I write to occasionally, but that's about it for family. I'm sorry, Willow said softly. I understand how that feels. My mother died when I was 16, my father just last year. I have only my aunt remaining, and we were never particularly close. It's a hard thing, being alone in the world. Yates's eyes held hers across the table. Makes a person value connections when they find them. The implication behind his words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Instead, The conversation turned to lighter topics, books they had read, places they had seen, the peculiarities of Cottonwood Springs and its inhabitants. Willow found herself laughing more than she had in months, perhaps years. There was an ease to being with Yates that she had never experienced with any other man. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared a similar outlook on many things: a belief in honesty, a value for independence, a quiet appreciation for the beauty of the Western landscape. As they walked back to the hotel under a star-filled sky, Yates offered his arm, and Willow took it without hesitation. The night air was cool but not cold, the street quiet except for the distant piano music from the saloon. "I've enjoyed this evening very much," Willow said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "As have I." Yates slowed his pace, seemingly in no hurry to end their time together. "It's been a long while since I've had the pleasure of dinner with a beautiful, intelligent woman." "The frontier does seem somewhat lacking in social opportunities," Willow observed with a smile. "It's not just that." He glanced down at her, his expression serious despite his light tone. "It takes a special kind of woman to see past the badge and the gun to the man wearing them." "Perhaps it takes a special kind of man to see past a woman's circumstances to who she truly is," Willow countered softly. They had reached the hotel. But instead of going inside, Yates led her to the small porch at the side of the building, where 2 chairs offered a view of the moonlit street. They sat, still close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Willow," Yates began after a moment, "I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "What is it?" "My work with Reed Dalton is coming to a head. I've gathered enough evidence to make arrests, but it's going to be dangerous. Dalton has at least 10 men riding with him, and not all of them will come quietly." Concern flooded through her. "When?" "Soon. Within the week, most likely." He turned to face her more directly. "I wanted you to know because I find myself caring about what you think, about whether you'd worry if I suddenly disappeared again." The admission, simple as it was, touched Willow deeply. "I would worry," she acknowledged. "I do care what happens to you, Yates." He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "That means a great deal to me, more than I can properly express." In the silver moonlight, his face was etched with shadows and light, the strength of his features softened by the tenderness in his eyes. Willow felt drawn to him with an intensity that both frightened and exhilarated her. "Yates," she whispered, hardly knowing what she meant to say. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Willow remained still, her eyes closing as his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with unspoken promise. His hand came up to cup her cheek, the calluses on his palm a reminder of the hard life he led, even as his touch conveyed nothing but tenderness. When they parted, Willow's heart was racing, and she knew her cheeks must be flushed despite the coolness of the night air. Yates's expression was one of wonder mixed with concern. "I hope I haven't overstepped," he said quietly. "No," Willow assured him, her voice steadier than she felt. "You haven't." They sat in silence for a moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. Finally, Yates spoke again, his voice low. "I should escort you inside. It's getting late, and we both have responsibilities tomorrow." Though reluctant to end the evening, Willow knew he was right. They stood together, and he walked her to the hotel entrance, where he kissed her hand once more before bidding her good night. As Willow prepared for bed, her lips still tingling from their kiss, she found herself at a crossroads she hadn't anticipated when she first arrived in Cottonwood Springs. In just a few short weeks, she had begun building a new life for herself, one with purpose and independence. Now, her growing feelings for Yates added another dimension, another possibility. Mrs. Prescott's warning echoed in her mind. "Be sure of what you want before you give your heart away." But as Willow drifted towards sleep, she wondered if perhaps her heart had already made its choice, regardless of what her practical mind might counsel. The next few days passed in a haze of work and stolen moments with Yates. Though his duties kept him busy during the day, they found time for walks in the early evening and conversations in the hotel parlor after Willow's work was done. Each encounter deepened her understanding of him, his sense of justice, his quiet humor, his thoughtfulness. On the third day after their dinner, Willow was organizing supplies in the hotel storeroom when she heard raised voices from the lobby. Curious, she made her way to the front, where she found Yates in a tense conversation with Sheriff Hollis. "Moving the cattle tonight," the sheriff was saying. Peterson's boy overheard them at the saloon. "They're planning to cross into New Mexico territory before dawn." "Then we move now," Yates replied grimly. "How many men can you deputize? 3, maybe 4 reliable ones." Sheriff Hollis rubbed his jaw worriedly. "It's not enough, Yates. Dalton's got at least 8 with him, all armed. We'll have the element of surprise, and I've sent for backup from the territorial office, though I doubt they'll arrive in time." Yates noticed Willow then, his expression softening briefly before turning serious again. "Miss Montgomery, is everything all right?" she asked, though it was clear from their conversation that it wasn't. The 2 men exchanged glances before Yates spoke. "We've received information that requires immediate action. Sheriff Hollis and I will be riding out shortly." The carefully neutral words didn't disguise the danger implied. Willow felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "This is about Reed Dalton, isn't it?" "Yes," Yates admitted, seeing no point in denying it. "But it's nothing for you to worry about. We'll handle it." "I'll gather the men," Sheriff Hollis said, clapping Yates on the shoulder. "Meet at my office in 30 minutes. After the sheriff departed, Yates took Willow's elbow and guided her to a quiet corner of the lobby. "I'm sorry. I had hoped to have more time before this came to a head." "How dangerous is this going to be?" Willow asked directly. He didn't sugarcoat his answer. "Dalton and his men won't surrender peacefully. They're looking at prison time for cattle rustling and possibly worse charges. And you're going after them with just the sheriff and a few deputies." She couldn't keep the concern from her voice. "It's my job, Willow." His expression was gentle but resolute. "And the longer we wait, the more likely they are to escape justice entirely." Willow wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, but she knew it would be futile. This was who he was, a man bound by duty and his own moral code. It was, she realized, part of why she had come to care for him so deeply. "Please be careful," she said instead, reaching for his hand. "I will." He squeezed her fingers reassuringly. "I have more reason than ever to come back safely." The implication behind his words made her breath catch. "Yates, I need to prepare," he said reluctantly, "but I wanted you to know what was happening. I didn't want to just disappear again. Thank you for that." Willow hesitated, then acted on impulse, rising on her toes to press a quick kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she explained, blushing at her own boldness. A slow smile spread across his face. "I'll take all the luck I can get." As he turned to leave, Willow called after him, "I'll be waiting for you to return." The hours that followed were among the longest of Willow's life. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept returning to Yates and the danger he was facing. Mrs. Prescott, sensing her distraction, eventually sent her upstairs to rest. "You're no use to anyone in this state," the widow said kindly. "Go on up. I'll call you if there's any news." In her room, Willow paced, too agitated to sit still. She had known Yates for less than a month, yet the thought of losing him filled her with a pain so acute it took her breath away. When had he become so important to her? And what would she do if he didn't return? Darkness fell, and still there was no word. Willow lit her lamp and tried to read, but the words swam before her eyes. Finally, she gave up and went to the window, staring out at the quiet street below as if she could will Yates to appear. It was near midnight when she heard the commotion, horses arriving, men's voices raised in urgency. Throwing a shawl around her shoulders, Willow hurried downstairs, heedless of propriety. The lobby was filled with activity. Sheriff Hollis was directing men carrying a stretcher toward one of the ground floor rooms. Mrs. Prescott was bustling about with towels and hot water. And there, in the midst of it all, was Yates alive but bleeding from a wound in his left shoulder, his face pale beneath the trail dust. "Yates!" Willow cried, rushing toward him. He looked up at the sound of her voice, relief washing over his features. "Willow, I'm all right." "It's just a flesh wound." "Just a flesh wound," Mrs. Prescott scoffed, appearing at his side with bandages. "That bullet went clean through your shoulder, Marshal Blackwood. You're lucky it didn't hit anything vital." "Marshal," came a weak voice from the stretcher being carried into the nearby room. "Since when are you a marshal, Blackwood?" Willow glanced over to see a young cowboy, barely more than a boy, with a blood-stained bandage around his middle. One of Dalton's men, she presumed. "For quite some time now, Parker," Yates replied dryly. "Perhaps you should have asked before you started running stolen cattle." Sheriff Hollies approached them, his own arm sporting a makeshift bandage. "Doc's on his way for the boy, says the wound isn't as bad as it looks. Dalton and 2 others are dead. The rest are locked up awaiting transport to the territorial prison." "And the cattle?" Yates asked, "being rounded up as we speak. Carter and Peterson are identifying their brands." The sheriff clapped Yates on his uninjured shoulder. "Good work tonight." "Could have gone a lot worse." "Too many dead already," Yates said grimly. As the sheriff moved away to supervise the wounded cowboy, Willow stepped closer to Yates. "Let me help you," she said, noting how he was favoring his injured shoulder. "I'm fine," he started to protest, but Mrs. Prescott cut him off. "Don't be foolish. Let the girl help you to your room so I can tend to that wound properly." With Willow's support, Yates made his way up the stairs to his room. Once inside, Mrs. Prescott efficiently helped him remove his blood-stained jacket and shirt, revealing the extent of his injury. Willow tried not to stare at his bare chest, focusing instead on the angry wound that marred his left shoulder. "Bullet went straight through," Mrs. Prescott confirmed after examination. "Clean exit wound. You're lucky, Marshal." As the widow cleaned and bandaged the injury, Willow kept a basin of fresh water ready, her face composed despite the turmoil of emotions inside her. When Mrs. Prescott finally declared the wound properly dressed, she gathered her supplies and headed for the door. "He'll need rest and someone to check that bandage in the morning," she instructed Willow. "I trust you can manage that." "Of course," Willow replied, grateful for the widow's matter-of-fact approach to the situation. After Mrs. Prescott left, a silence fell between them. Yates sat on the edge of the bed, shirtless save for the bandage wrapped around his shoulder and chest, while Willow stood a few feet away, suddenly uncertain. "You should rest," she said finally. "Mrs. Prescott's right you've lost blood." "I will," he assured her. "But first, come here, Willow." She moved to stand before him, and he reached up with his good arm to take her hand. "I kept thinking of you out there tonight," he said quietly. "When the shooting started, when Parker's bullet caught me, all I could think was that I had to get back to you." Willow's throat tightened with emotion. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "When I saw you bleeding." "I'm tougher than I look," he said with a faint smile. "It'll take more than a rustler's bullet to keep me from coming back to you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Willow sank down to sit beside him on the bed, still holding his hand. "Yates," she began hesitantly, "these past weeks, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time." "I feel the same," he said, his voice low and earnest. "From that first day when I saw you walking toward the station, something about you called to me. Not just your beauty, though there's plenty of that." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "It was your courage, your determination. Even in tears, you had more backbone than most men I've known." Willow smiled at that. "I was a mess that day." "You were magnificent," he countered. "And every day since has only confirmed my first impression." He lifted his hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Willow. My life is dangerous and often lonely. I can't offer the kind of security someone like Harold Whitley might have provided." "I don't want security," Willow said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Not if it means settling for less than love." Yates's eyes darkened at her words. Is that what you're looking for? Love, I wasn't, she admitted. When I came west, I was looking for safety, for a predictable future, but now, she took a deep breath. Now I know that what I truly want is a life with meaning, with passion. With a partner who sees me for who I am and values that person. And do you think you could find those things with a battered old marshal who spends too much time in the saddle? Yates asked, a vulnerability in his question that touched her deeply. In answer, Willow leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't yet put into words: her fear for him, her joy at his safe return, and the love that had grown in her heart, despite every practical objection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I take it that's a yes, he murmured. Willow laughed softly. Yes, Yates Blackwood, that's a definite yes. Then I have something to ask you, he said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. It's too soon, I know that. We've known each other only a few weeks, but tonight made me realize that life out here is uncertain at best. I don't want to waste whatever time we have. Willow's heart hammered in her chest as he continued. I'm not offering a fancy house or an easy life. But I am offering my heart, my protection, and my promise to respect the remarkable woman you are. He squeezed her hand. Willow Montgomery, would you consider becoming my wife? For a moment, Willow couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the surety of her own feelings and the unexpected turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been on her way to marry a man she'd never met, seeking security above all else. Now, she was being offered a life that promised neither security nor ease, but something far more precious. Yes, she said finally, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I will marry you, Yates. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. Despite his injury, he pulled her into an embrace, holding her close with his good arm as if she were the most precious thing in the world. You've made me the happiest man in the territory, he murmured against her hair. And you've given me something I never expected to find in Cottonwood Springs, Willow replied, her heart full to bursting. A home, a future, a love worth taking risks for. As they held each other in the quiet room, the dangers of the night receding like shadows before dawn, Willow thought of the tearful woman who had walked toward the station just weeks ago, heartbroken and alone. How strange and wonderful that her journey had led not to the safe harbor she'd sought, but to the wild, unpredictable adventure of loving a man like Yates Blackwood. It wasn't the future she had planned. It was infinitely better. 2 days later, Yates was up and moving around despite Mrs. Prescott's protestations that he needed more rest. His wound was healing well, but he winced occasionally when he moved too quickly or tried to use his left arm. The territorial office has sent reinforcements to transport the prisoners, he told Willow as they walked slowly down the main street, his right arm linked with hers for support. They'll be here tomorrow. Will you have to leave with them? Willow asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. No, my report's been filed, and I've been granted leave to recover. He smiled down at her, and to make certain arrangements for our future. The word future still sent a thrill through Willow. They had agreed to a brief engagement, just long enough for banns to be posted and for Willow to write to her aunt with the news. Neither saw any reason to delay, especially given the uncertainty of Yates's profession. I spoke with Reverend Tanner this morning, Yates continued. He's agreed to perform the ceremony 2 weeks from Sunday, if that suits you. It does, Willow replied, squeezing his arm gently, though I'm afraid I don't have a proper wedding dress. I'm sure Mrs. Tanner and the ladies of the church would be happy to help, he suggested. They're quite taken with the idea of the town's first proper wedding in over a year, Willow laughed. Mrs. Prescott mentioned something similar. I think she's planning to bake a special cake for the occasion. They paused outside the land office, and Yates's expression grew more serious. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, about where we'll live after we're married. Willow had been wondering about this herself. As a marshal, Yates traveled frequently, and she wasn't sure if he even had a permanent home. "I've never had much use for property before," he explained. "A room at whatever town I was working from was sufficient, but that's no life for a wife." "I could travel with you," Willow suggested. "I'm not afraid of the trail." He smiled at her willingness but shook his head. "Some trips, perhaps. But others are too dangerous, and some take me into territories where no lady should have to venture." His expression softened. "Besides, I like the idea of having a home to return to, a place where you'll be waiting." "What did you have in mind?" Willow asked, curious now. "There's a small ranch for sale just outside town. Nothing fancy, a sturdy house, a barn, about 40 acres, good water from a year-round creek." Yates gestured toward the land office. "I've been speaking with Mr. Reynolds about it." The previous owner was an older fellow who moved back east to live with his daughter. It's been empty for 6 months. Willow's eyes widened. "You want to buy a ranch?" "If you like the idea," he said, watching her face carefully. "It's close enough to town that you wouldn't be isolated when I'm away on martial business. And it's large enough that we could build a life there. Maybe even raise a family someday." The thought of a home of their own, a real home, not just rooms in a hotel or boarding house, filled Willow with unexpected longing. "Could we see it?" she asked eagerly. Yates's smile widened at her enthusiasm. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've arranged for us to ride out there this afternoon, if you're free." The ranch was everything Yates had described and more. The house was simple but solid, with 4 rooms including a kitchen with a proper stove. The barn needed some repairs, but was spacious enough for several horses and storage. The land rolled gently away from the buildings, with the promised creek cutting through the property like a silver ribbon. As Willow walked through the empty rooms, she could imagine them filled with furniture, curtains at the windows, a fire in the hearth during winter evenings. It wouldn't be the grand Philadelphia home she'd grown up in, but it would be theirs, a place to build a life together. "What do you think?" Yates asked, watching her explore with evident pleasure. "It's perfect," Willow replied honestly. "I can see us here, Yates. I can see a future." "So can I." He crossed to where she stood by the window and wrapped his good arm around her waist. "I've already spoken to Reynolds about the price. It's within our means, especially with the reward money coming from the Dalton case." "Reward money?" "For recovering the stolen cattle," he explained. "A percentage goes to the Marshal Service, but a portion comes to me directly. It's not a fortune, but combined with my savings, it's enough to buy the ranch and make the necessary improvements." Willow turned in his embrace to face him. "Are you certain this is what you want?" "A ranch is a big responsibility, especially with your duties as a marshal." "I'm certain about you," he said simply. "The rest we'll figure out together. I can hire help for the ranch when I'm away. And eventually, I might consider taking a less demanding position, perhaps as a sheriff somewhere, with more regular hours." The fact that he was already thinking of adjusting his life to accommodate their future together touched Willow deeply. "I love you," she said, the words coming naturally now. "And I love this place. It feels right." Yates's kiss was gentle, but filled with promise of the home they would build, the life they would share, and the love that had brought them together against all odds. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. News of their engagement spread quickly through Cottonwood Springs, and to Willow's surprise, the town embraced the romance of their story with enthusiasm. Mrs. Tanner organized a sewing circle to help create a suitable wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from the mercantile. Mrs. Prescott insisted that the wedding reception be held at the Silverthorne Hotel at no charge. Even Harold Whitley, after an initial awkward encounter, offered sincere congratulations and a wedding gift of silver candlesticks. As for the ranch, Yates completed the purchase with surprising efficiency. He hired men to make the necessary repairs to the barn and house, and ordered furniture to be delivered from the nearest large town. Willow spent her free hours planning the arrangement of their new home, making lists of household items they would need, and dreaming of the life they would build together. The day before the wedding, Willow received a letter from her aunt in Philadelphia. She had written to inform her of her engagement and new life in the West, not expecting a particularly warm response given their somewhat distant relationship. To her surprise, the letter was both supportive and generous. "My dear niece," her aunt wrote, "while I confess I was shocked by your news, I find myself admiring your courage in forging a new path. Your mother always said you had a spirit that would never be contained by society's expectations, and it seems she was right. I am enclosing a bank draft representing your portion of your father's estate, which I have been managing. It is not a large sum, but it may help you establish your new home. I wish you and Marshall Blackwood every happiness." The enclosed bank draft was for $500 more money than Willow had seen since leaving Philadelphia. When she showed it to Yates that evening, he was genuinely pleased for her. "That's a tidy sum," he remarked. "It would buy a lot of cattle to start our herd, or make substantial improvements to the house. Or it could be set aside for our future children's education," Willow suggested, watching his reaction carefully. Yates's expression softened. "Children," he repeated, the word clearly stirring something deep within him. "I'd like that. A boy with your spirit and maybe a girl with your beautiful eyes. Or a girl with your courage and a boy with your sense of justice," Willow countered with a smile. He took her hand, his expression growing more serious. "Are you nervous about tomorrow, about marrying you?" "Not at all," Willow replied honestly. "About standing before the entire town in a ceremony, perhaps a little." "They're good people," Yates assured her. "They've taken you to their hearts, just as I have." It was true. In the short time she had been in Cottonwood Springs, Willow had formed connections she never would have expected, not just with Yates, but with Mrs. Prescott, the Tanners, and others who had welcomed her into their community. She had come west seeking security through marriage to a stranger, only to find a different kind of belonging altogether. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp but not cold. Willow, dressed in the beautiful gown the ladies of the town had helped create, a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk with lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Tanner arranged her hair with sprigs of white flowers and declared her the loveliest bride Cottonwood Springs has ever seen. The church was filled to capacity when Willow walked down the aisle on Sheriff Hollis's arm. He had offered to give her away in the absence of any male relatives. At the altar stood Yates, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his face solemn until he caught sight of her. Then his expression transformed, a smile breaking through that held all the warmth and promise of their future together. Reverend Tanner's ceremony was simple but meaningful. When Willow and Yates exchanged their vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The kiss they shared after being pronounced husband and wife was brief but tender, a promise of deeper intimacies to come. The reception at the Silverthorne Hotel was a joyous affair, with music from a local fiddler, Mrs. Prescott's magnificent cake, and enough food to feed half the county. Willow found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many of whom she now counted as friends. "Mrs. Blackwood," Yates whispered in her ear during a quiet moment, "are you ready to see our home?" They had decided to spend their wedding night at the ranch rather than at the hotel, though most of their belongings would be moved over the following day. Yates had been working on the house in secret for the past few days, refusing to let Willow visit until everything was ready. As they drove the wagon away from town, Willow nestled against her new husband's side, a sense of rightness filling her heart. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in golds and crimsons that seemed to celebrate their union. "I have something to confess," Yates said as they approached the ranch. "I may have gone a bit overboard with preparations for tonight." Willow looked at him questioningly, but he just smiled and urged the horses forward. When they rounded the final bend in the road, she gasped in delight. The ranch house was transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch, casting a warm glow over the freshly painted exterior. Through the windows, she could see more lights inside, creating an inviting golden ambience. Yates helped her down from the wagon and, in a move that made her laugh with surprise, swept her into his arms to carry her over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Willow looked around in wonder. The previously empty house now contained beautiful furniture, a polished dining table with chairs, a comfortable-looking sofa, and a rocking chair by the fireplace where a cheerful fire blazed. Vases of wildflowers adorned several surfaces, and new curtains hung at the windows. "Yates," she breathed, "it's wonderful. How did you manage all this?" "I had help," he admitted. "Mrs. Prescott coordinated everything." The furniture was delivered yesterday, and she enlisted several ladies to arrange it all while we were at the church. Willow moved through the rooms, each one a new delight. The kitchen was fully equipped with dishes, pots, and staples for cooking. The small second bedroom had been set up as a cozy sitting room with bookshelves and a writing desk. And the main bedroom. She paused in the doorway, her breath catching at the sight. A large bed with a handsome quilt dominated the room, flanked by small tables with oil lamps. A dressing table with a mirror stood against one wall, and a wardrobe against another. Someone had scattered rose petals across the quilt and placed a vase of fresh flowers on the dressing table. Yates came up behind her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "Is it all right?" he asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "I wanted everything to be perfect for you." Willow turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "It's more than all right, it's perfect." She reached up to touch his face, still somewhat amazed that this man, this strong, honorable, tender man, was now her husband. "I love you, Yates Blackwood." "And I love you, Willow Blackwood," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." Their kiss was different now, deeper, unhurried, filled with the knowledge that they had all night, and all the nights thereafter, to explore their love for one another. As Yates's arms tightened around her, drawing her closer against the solid warmth of his body, Willow knew that she had found what she never knew she was seeking. Not just security or respectability, but a love as vast and boundless as the western sky. 3 years later, Willow stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as a familiar figure on horseback appeared on the horizon. She smiled, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew, the other holding their 2-year-old son, William, who squealed with delight at the sight of his father returning home. "Pa!" the little boy cried, wriggling to be set down so he could run to meet Yates. Willow watched as her husband dismounted and swept their son into his arms, tossing him high before settling him securely on his shoulders. The sight never failed to warm her heart. The strong, sometimes stern Marshal Blackwood, transformed by fatherhood into a man who could laugh with abandon. As they approached the house, Willow's smile widened. Yates had been gone for 2 weeks this time, tracking a gang of bank robbers across the territory. Such separations were part of their life together, but the joy of reunion always made them bearable. "There's my beautiful wife," Yates called as he neared the porch, setting William down to run ahead. He climbed the steps and gathered Willow carefully into his arms, mindful of her pregnancy. "I've missed you something fierce." "And we've missed you," she replied, accepting his kiss with a happiness that had only deepened over their years together. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. With the help of 2 hired hands, they maintained a small but healthy herd of cattle, and Willow had established a productive vegetable garden and orchard. The house had expanded to include another bedroom for William and the coming baby, and Yates had built a sturdy corral for the horses he trained in his time between martial duties. Life wasn't always easy. There had been harsh winters, dry summers, and times when Yates's work took him away for weeks at a stretch. There had been the constant worry whenever he pursued dangerous criminals, and the night of terror when William had developed a high fever that the doctor feared might take him from them. But through it all, their love had remained steadfast, a foundation as solid as the land beneath their feet. Willow had found strength she never knew she possessed, and Yates had discovered a capacity for tenderness that surprised even himself. As they walked into the house together, William chattering excitedly about the new calf born during his father's absence, Willow reflected on the strange path that had led her here. The tearful young woman who had walked toward Cottonwood Springs station all those years ago, heartbroken and alone, could never have imagined the rich, full life that awaited her. "You're thoughtful tonight," Yates observed later, as they sat on the porch after William was tucked into bed. The evening air was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "I was just thinking about the day we met," Willow explained, leaning her head against his shoulder. "How close I came to missing all of this." Yates took her hand, his thumb caressing her wedding band. "I believe some things are meant to be, no matter what path we take to get there. I was meant to find you that day, just as you were meant to find your way here." "To think I was crying over Harold Whitley," Willow said with a soft laugh. "Now I can hardly remember his face." "While I remember every detail of yours from that first moment," Yates countered. "The way the sun caught in your hair, how you tried to be brave despite your tears. You told me I wasn't alone," Willow recalled, "and I never have been since." Yates drew her closer, his hand coming to rest protectively over their unborn child. "And you never will be," he promised. "Not as long as I have breath in my body." As the stars emerged in the vast western sky above them, Willow Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the love of a man who had seen her strength, even in her moment of greatest weakness, who had offered his hand when she needed it most, and who continued to walk beside her on the remarkable journey their lives had become. She had walked toward the station crying, but she would walk the rest of her days with joy in her heart and the love of her cowboy marshal by her side. And that, Willow knew, was the greatest blessing of all.